couple wanted to get married one night, so they went to the minister and asked him to marry them. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry." He said, "I'm just going to start my evening services," he says. And he said, "As soon as I get through, you sit down in the back of the church, and then when I get through, I'll call you to the front." So the young couple sat down in the back of the church. When he got through with his service, he said, "Now all those who wish to get married will please come to the front." And 13 women and one man rushed to the front. See, when women want something, you go after it. Now, if we can get them interested, you know that. If I'm interested in social credit, they put it over. We can get them interested in this monetary reform that's needed so badly in our country, where we're going places. Now, first I have to say a few words about why I'm not here as a social creditor. I haven't been a social creditor for quite a few months. In fact, I haven't got a membership in the Social Credit Party anymore. And that was because of the leadership that we have in the Social Credit Party in Ontario. I worked my heart out in trying to convince this man, to be reasonable, to make some kind of a cutoff or something, give him Ontario or the Eastern Canada and let us work in the West. When I couldn't go anywhere with him, I turned him over to Mr. Glorious. And Mr. Glorious, I think, had the last word. I think Mr. Glorious can tell you that he said, "This is the way it is, like it or leave it." That gave me an idea, and I look back over the social credit movement and all political parties. And our trouble has always been in the leadership. Not always, because we had some good leaders. We had Solon Lowe, we had some awful dedicated people in the social credit movement. But since social credit has kind of gone down, if you look back, it's been leadership trouble. Some of our leaders have joined other parties. Others have kind of made a mess of social credit, like down in Quebec for a while there, we got a mess, and so social credit kind of died. So in the meantime, I have always believed, all the time I've been a social creditor, and I've talked to different people, how come that we call our system that we have British parliamentary democracy? I don't know how we come to the conclusion that it was democracy. British parliamentary democracy is not democracy. It's a form of dictatorship. The only difference between this dictatorship and the outright dictators, they never have an election. In our system, we have an election every 4 or 5 years, but our choices are the only democracy we see is on election day. And on election day, we are out to vote for a new dictator, because no matter which party that we elect, he's going to have the same power. He chooses the cabinet. The cabinet is really the government, and he can hire or fire whoever he pleases. That makes the leader or the prime minister a dictator. It makes the president of the United States a dictator. It's still a different system down there, but still, the president is sort of a dictator. After he says veto something, I think it takes 2/3 of the thing to overrule it. So a little better than ours maybe, but I don't know. So with this in mind, I'd always proposed that the cabinet should not be elected, or appointed rather, by the prime minister, but should be elected from the elected members of parliament. Always had that idea. But I never knew of a single country that had that. And so I thought it was just one of my brain ideas. I never preached it very much, just privately. Until something happened not too long ago. And I have here, and if you haven't got it, you can get a hold of one. The Trouble with Canada by William Gardner. And that last chapter in that book changed my life for what I've got left. because he preaches in there exactly what I believe. And he says there is a country that already has that. And to my surprise was that we've been in the dark all these years. Switzerland. Switzerland has a government where all the members who are elected, first of all, let me give you a short rundown of what Switzerland has got. They got the National Assembly, and it consists of 2 members from each canton. Now a canton there is the same as a province here. This is already a step in the right direction. You see, we were trying to elect an equal second. In Switzerland, they elect 2 members from each province, and that's the National Assembly. Then they elect 200 members in Switzerland, like we call our members of parliament. And then the National Council. And then the National Council and the Assembly meet together, and they elect themselves a president for 1 year. Just imagine, a president for 1 year. Next year, they elect a new president. And what they usually do, in the Assembly, the National Assembly, they pick the cabinet. And they only have 7 cabinet ministers in Switzerland. And the rest of the provinces in Switzerland have a decentralized form of government. The provinces have so much right, and I thought so many times, I wonder how Quebec would look upon that if we found out, that we wanted, all of Canada wanted to decentralize and not put so much power into the federal government. But every year they have they're elected for 4 years, these different heads of the government. Now they then turn around and this next year they have a different member of the 7 members takes his turn as Prime Minister. And they cannot succeed each other. You can't have a president this year and elect him again next year. Then they go ahead and they have a referendum, an initiative. And that, of course, is a wonderful thing. In other words, there is no serious legislation ever put out by the government. They immediately go for a referendum. It's a very serious thing. Because they know that the people are going to come along with the initiative where they initiate a referendum. And the people decide. So Switzerland doesn't belong to the United Nations. They don't belong to the World Bank. They don't belong to the I.M.F. They voted down. They don't want it. They are a complete democracy. The kind of democracy this man says that Abraham Lincoln dreamt of to put into the United States. Only slip, fell here and there, and it hasn't turned out the way it should have. But Switzerland has got it. So we're not talking about something that can't be done. It is being done. As a result of the kind of government that Switzerland has got, they got the highest standard of living in the entire world. They have no strikes, nor next to none. They have one once in a while, but not too many. Their unemployment is no higher than 1.5%. It's been as low as in 1989. It was 0.5%. They have 25% of their labor force, foreign labor coming into Switzerland to work with that. No higher, as I said, the highest is 1.5%. They haven't even got monetary reform. They still have the highest, they have a balance of trade. Somebody get me a glass of water, please. They have a balance of trade of $3 to $4 billion a year. And the reason they have that is because they stayed out of debt. And it's our debt that is going to kill Canada. It's killing it right now. Now we couldn't do that. We could never get out of this debt. Could never get out of this debt without monetary reform or bank. I like to call it banking reform. Not too much wrong with our monetary system. What is wrong with is our banking system, because our government has turned over this right to the banks when it should belong to the government. So I think sometimes we scare people who have quite a bit of money in the bank or wealthy. When we call monetary reform, we get scared we're going to monkey around with the monetary system and maybe the money is going to become valueless. But with banking reform, if you show them how the banks are working on a 5% reserve when they should be working on a 100% reserve, that's all that needs to be changed. And you see, the minute you put the banks on a 100% reserve, you automatically put the right to create money back into the hand of the Canadian government or the Bank of Canada. So now, after reading this book, we got busy in Saskatchewan. But we like social credit so much, so we took the social credit platform, the last one we have. And we took the main things in social credit that we thought were on the right track, and most of them were on the right track. We took most of those. But we added to that the referendum, the initiative, and let me tell you one more important thing we got in Switzerland, and they have in all of Europe now, except England, proportional representation. Proportional representation is, of course, so important. They have in Switzerland 12 parties who have members in the National Council. 12 parties. The top three are 40, 51, I think 47 and 40 or something. And it takes three of those parties to form the government, to get a majority in the House of 200 members and 46 provincial people that are on the National Assembly. It takes three parties. So already in that sense, you have taken this power out of that you have in your prime minister that most of the countries operate on. You've taken that power away and then you've divided it. I have an awfully good case, and some of you probably have seen it, when Mr. Bethune was in Edmonton. He had a tape on proportional representation, and through his goodness, he sold it to me. We have no TV, so I didn't bring it. But proportional representation is now being used in every Western country of Europe except England. And it is the most honest and the fairest way to get 1% of the vote. You get one member out of every 100 that you use. So 200-member assembly, you get one member elected. 2%, you get two. If you get 50%, you get half of the seats. We have a system of voting in where Mrs. Haverstock in Saskatchewan in the last election, Liberal leader, polled 24%, the Liberal Party in Saskatchewan of the vote, and they got one seat. The Conservative polled 26% of the vote, and they got 11 seats. 2% of the vote. And the NDP got elected in Ontario with 37.5%, and got a clear majority in the House. Mr. Harcourt got less votes in this last election than they had in the previous one. 2% less vote. He got a clear majority, and before it was in the opposition. The system that we've got of voting is not democratic, it's not right, and it's not fair. So we've got in our suggestions here. We want proportional representation. We want the referendum and the initiative. Well, if the government doesn't give you a vote, then people can ask for one. And if the people vote for something in Switzerland, it's got to be put in. The government can't say, well, it was only 51 or 52%, so we'll pass it by for the time. If the majority of the people vote for something in Switzerland or through the referendum, the government has got to do it. This gives the people the power where it really belongs. Real, true grassroots democracy. And for that alone, even without monetary reform, is one wonderful thing. Let me tell you something else, that I don't believe you'll ever get monetary reform as long as you have the kind of dictatorship kind of governments that we have today. Because all the powers to be is have to get one man on their side. That's the Prime Minister. The cabinet hasn't anything to say because he can fire them if they don't agree with him. And so this is what we're working on. We'd like to put those things into, now we've given the name, or we've chosen the name, Canada Party. Now why did we choose that name? Because in Saskatchewan, we had a meeting with the Canada Party, I'd say 10 or 12 years ago, wanting to amalgamate because they were on monetary reform, and so was social credit. So we wanted to get together, but at that time social credit was riding pretty high yet. So we didn't want to give up the name of social credit. They didn't want to give up the name Canada Party. So it died down. But now we found out that the Canada Party is no longer a registered party and the name is available. And because they were a monetary reform party, we adopted the name Canada Party. Our people in Saskatchewan like it very much. Okay. So anyway, I would throw this out to you. And here's what we did on our own. And I'll start something. We immediately wrote to Ottawa and we asked for a form to start a new party. Because Canada Party no longer exists. And this is what they sent us. 25 names there, 25 names there, 25 names there, 11 on here, and on this one here brings this over 100, and that's what you need to form a new party. But we have 3 more of these out in Saskatchewan, and I'm pretty close to 150 names, and you only need 100. But here's what happens. Everybody that signs this, when we send it to Ottawa, we sell them a membership and we make that very small because we don't know whether it's going to be successful or not. So we pay $1 per membership, just $1. And sign this here, this petition to form a new party. Now, the government then turns around and it takes all these names and sends you a letter. Do you belong to this party? And of course you've signed it. Got a membership. You answer the letter yes, and you send it back. Now the reason why we wanted 150 or 200 members to sign this is because some people may not return the letter, and and if you didn't have enough, of course you have to get a chance to send it some more. But we're not going to bother with it. So we haven't, as I say, enough now. But we want Alberta. And we want British Columbia. Go from here to British Columbia. Got a meeting in West Bank, British Columbia on Monday night. Going to be on TV there, on radio. We want the other 2 provinces. We want 4 provinces in Western Canada to get into this thing. Because when we pick the officers, what we're trying to do is pick them along the Switzerland way. What they do over there is to try to get 1 president, vice presidents, 4 is room here, 1 from each province, 1 from British Columbia, 1 from Alberta, 1 from Manitoba. And then divide the other members of the executive between the provinces, so that everybody gets equal representation. And that's what I'm here today to propose to you. And of course, there are a lot of people, I say, why start a new party, or so on. Well, I have here a letter, a lot of you must remember, you used to get a letter from Abundance in England. I'm sure that some of you got this a few years back. Poor fellow, I think he passed away. But here's what he says. I wholeheartedly agree with him. What was mostly needed then, but about the rest of the statement. The moment you label a party social credit, you get a wrangle about technique. It goes on then to show that the wrangling that's been done in social credit. One wants the dividend to be paid this way, and the other one wants to pay the dividend that way. One wants to put it through building roads and highways and bridges, and the other wants it direct to the work. And all kinds of things he goes on to say. So he says the only way you'll ever get away from that, as Major Douglas has said, is stay out of politics. That's what Major Douglas himself said. And make it a movement of the people. And of course, he goes on to say, we've tried that for 50 or 60 years and it doesn't work. So why don't you, he says, start the same party under a new name? Right? And you forget all the wrangles and the whatnot that you get up when you get to the technique of social credit. And that's exactly what we're in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. By the way, these names are all from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I had a meeting, just to show you how this goes over, and of course maybe we wouldn't get it here, because I don't know whether the Alberta farmers are suffering like the Saskatchewan now. But I had a meeting at Redbirds, and I had only 60 people turn up, farmers. Didn't know what they were coming for. Build this monetary reform or banking reform. The meeting was built. Now there's a new party. When the meeting was over, I explained what they're doing in Switzerland, and I said, now how many of you people would like to sign this? And 47 out of the 60 or 65 that signed their names on it. They lined up. I never even had that happen at the height of social credit. They are already out there, and they're desperate to have some political party where the people have something to say. In the United States, they're even voting for people who are not on the ballot. They're so dissatisfied with what's going on with the politicians. You read the Reader's Digest and you see what the politicians have done for themselves in Canada. Swenson, Robinson, and a fefew others. When they get 70, by the time they're 75, read the Reader's Digest April issue. We're going to get $3,300,000 by the time they're 75 in pensions. They're sure looking after themselves. Well, it's time we turned around and said, no, listen, we are the people and we want democracy. And failing that, I'm not even going to the poll again. I'm sorry to say that. But all my life, since I was 20 years old, I've been in this movement. And I've only found out now how much of my life I have wasted in a system that isn't democratic at all. Not in its voting, not in its leadership, and not in its party. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thauberger. I'll just say a few things while the honorable gentleman to my right gets his breath and says a few things. If you want to stand up for a minute or two, just get your blood circulation, you can do so at this time.
How many here are familiar with the original proposals of the social credit dividend? Would you raise your hands, those who are familiar with the dividend concept? That's quite a goodly number. I think, number one, constitutional reform is a major issue in the governing of the country. We've seen that recently. Everybody is cheesed off. They don't want to hear anything more about constitutional reform, regardless of how you dress it up. Meaningful constitutional reform, I think, has a place and would be credible as the what's being honest by not calling this meeting or the Canada Party Social Credit Party, because it doesn't include the social dividend. That is the crux of social credit. If there's any shortfall in the money supply, then the dividend would make up that shortfall in the monetary supply to set up an equilibrium between the production production and prices of goods on the market. Now, any shortfall in this money supply will be issued directly to individuals, not to governments, to individuals, as dividends. In that way, the elector will have control of their elected representative by the ballot, and number two, by the money vote. Legislators want to enact some legislation. They will go to the taxpayers, the individuals, and ask for permission. May I collect taxes for this project or that project? We have a number of organizations that have called themselves social credit, and they want a shortfall in the money supply to be issued directly to governments for them to handle on our behalf. They had that in Russia. Until recently, Russia had no internal debt. Gorbachev said this in the 1985 Paris News Conference. We have no internal debt. He used the Gross Bank to finance production. He used the Gross Bank to move production to where it was destined. Their only trouble in Russia was that their philosophy was wrong. The individual was not the important thing, it was the state, the state, the state. And the state had a very aggressive philosophy on a war footing for all of their seven years of the USSR. If we give the state too much power through the control of our money system, by the government getting these new credits and new monies, the state will decide what is best for us. That is the negation of democracy. The greatest democracy we can have is individuals deciding through the ballot and through the money vote what our elected representatives will do. We have seen what has happened up to now. The government that hasn't had the money, they've borrowed over $400 billion. We're paying for it. Grandchildren will pay for it, and great-grandchildren. It's a no-end solution. The social dividend has been common to social credit. You can go to any international reference, the Columbia Encyclopedia, the Penguin Political Dictionary, whatever. It's an international concept. Political parties have made it what they are now. We hear a great deal of social creditors, going back to Douglas himself. Social credit should not ever become a political party. He had valid points. What has happened when they didn't become a political party? They were a lobby group. In Alberta, they tried to lobby the UFA, which would have little or nothing to do with them. In Quebec, the Union of Electors, which is a social credit organization, the largest in the world, they have a circulation of Michael and Berdemoff on basic social credit of over 140,000 copies in issue. There's a Polish member of parliament who is a social creditor, a member of Mike Walenza's government, because of the work of the Union of Electors who exerted pressure on the people in Poland. All of Louis Yvonne's work has been translated from the English and French to Polish, all his books. The papers, by the hundreds of thousands, are going into the country. They have one elected member of parliament who is not called social credit, although he embodies the social credit message. That's the only way, only time to my knowledge, that social credit has ever been effective in exerting pressure on elected representatives. In Alberta here, in the 1930s election campaign, the Liberal Party had a grand advertisement in the Edmonton Bulletin outlining beautifully all the social credit proposals. When elected, we will implement. Forgot about it when elections were over. In Quebec, the Union of Electors backed the Liberal Party. We forgot it when they were elected. I don't think we can trust others flying a different flag to enact social credit. Number one, we have to set up a social credit institute and know what we're talking about, with a common message. And we won't have all the splinter groups which have come out of social credit. With the Federal Social Credit Party, we've got this group over here, we've got that group over there. You can name any number of groups who are advocating social credit with a thorough understanding that they aren't social credit. Now, I think that if they were all called social credit and giving one unified well-researched, as Bill would say, well-researched message, we wouldn't have these problems. I do think that there is a place for the social dividend. This is primarily my concern about any political party. The name social credit, too, does carry some mystique, some good feelings to the electors of this province, to the electors of the whole of Canada, because of people like Solon Law that Joe has mentioned. But I want to emphasize that there is a proper and a good place and a needed place for a social dividend if there's any shortfall in the money supply at all. I thought perhaps, Joe, that we were going to go through the existing platform of the Canada Party. There are a number of things that I could speak about, but I just want to get this point made. The solution, monetary solution of the Canada Party doesn't give any consideration toward any thought of a social dividend. It follows along the line parallel to the sovereignty movement in the United States. The sovereignty movement in the United States is a growing movement which wants the municipal bodies to get debt-free money from the federal government, created debt-free as Lincoln's greenbacks were created, debt-free money into the hands of municipalities to improve, rebuild their infrastructures, the roads, streets, hospitals, schools, that sort of thing. Our federal social credit party took the same route some time ago. They wanted some of this new debt-free money to go into the schools, hospital, roads, whatever, as well as the dividend. Now the Canada Party, up to now, and I'm pleased that Joe wants input into the platform of the Canada Party, this is the place, I think, where those who are concerned should state the case for the dividends, so you have that fundamental democratic concept. I think that's all I'll say right now. We'll probably have more time to go over some of the other items of the platform. There's one thing on constitutional reform. I think the Canada Party in the proposed constitution says that Canada should be made up of 5 autonomous regions. Now, I don't know what that means. Some of these things should be explained maybe a little more fully to us. Yes?
Yeah, some of us, previous generations, we were sitting at the back, are not too clear about the social credit mechanism. Okay, money is a mechanism. Okay, although I'm familiar with the social credit, but what I don't understand correctly is social credit going to be the only part? In other words, the issuance of money on dividends, will it be issued only to the members of the party, or anybody outside of the party will they have access to the money, to the credit?
I don't pretend to be an expert, except that Beecher Douglas brought in his theories beginning with writings in 1918. He said that in the production of goods there are A and B costs. He said that all of the wages and salaries and dividends generated in production will never be enough to buy the production that the industry will provide. And there will be a gap in there, and that gap can be determined in numbers of dollars. You divide the shortfall of incomes, and that'll provide a dividend to every man, woman, and citizen of the country.
Yes.
For every citizen.
I understand that the A plus B theorem, but what I don't understand is, let's say I am one of the industrial people. In other words, I am one of the people that would like to build an industry. How do I get that money?
How would you get the capital to build?
The capital to build the industry. I'm not going to be the consumer that needs the dividend to buy the product. I'm going to be the producer. In other words, I like to be the industrialist. Now, if I go to a body such as the government to borrow the money get the money to form the industry, am I the owner of the industry, or is the government the owner of the industry?
Fundamentally, to social credit is that we believe in private ownership. And if you're going to form a company, it would be formulated much the same as it is now, is my understanding. You would sell equity rather than debt. Shares would be the emphasis rather than the debt structure. I think that there's a place for banks as well. This is not clearly defined.
See, this is the confusing issue amongst other young fellows, okay, which have been trying to follow the social credit philosophy. You know, there is no doubt that we need money to consume the goods. No doubt about it. I mean, I'm sorry, I have to give an example. If I produce a lighter, okay, and I put it onto the market, I certainly need to have money in circulation, okay, for somebody to buy this item. Therefore, I understand the A plus B theorem. But what I do not understand, which it confuses, is to whom is the privilege given to get the capital and form the industry to make this thing? In other words, is it fair that a person which belongs to the party can get the money to form the industry, and someone that does not belong to the party cannot get the money to form the industry?
We are agreed that production is not the problem, it is consumption.
It is the consumption, which is one aspect.
Social credit does not restrict ownership in any way. Anyone is free to establish their own business. We believe in private property and the profit motive.
But wouldn't that create a partisan philosophy amongst the community? In other words, once you have a social credit system in place, if you don't, and you have the access, somebody has the access to the money, to the credit, okay, would that form a partisanship towards the party? In other words, would not take a segment of followers away from the fairness of the community? You know?
Do you conceive a capital, a certain amount of capital there?
Yeah, what I conceive is a body is same like the bank. If I need a capital, say $1 million to set up an industry to build this lighter, okay, I would go to the bank. I'll borrow the money. The money gets into the circulation. I form the industry. I pay back the money. I become the owner of the industry. Okay, is that correct? That's the way everybody sees the capitalist system. All right. So what I'm not too clear about it is why form it as a party and not as an entity and a rule of the government of the entire country. In other words, what I'm saying, if somebody does not follow the philosophy of the social credit, would that person be forced to follow it because that has become the ruling body?
No, there are no special rules for those than us. It's an even playing field. If you want to start a business, then you sell equity stock to get your capital to start your business. You may go to banks or private borrowers for financing of the industry. Does that answer?
Essentially, if you go to a money source, they're not going to ask you what your political affiliation is. So if you're a liberal, you can go to the Treasury branch and implement through the same policy. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a member of the Social Credit Party in order to do it. They're instituting a new system of banking. It's a philosophy that is being worked out in actual practicality, but they are not. For instance, in the Soviet Union, if you were a communist, you could advance in the party to certain levels. If you were not a communist, you could not advance. It doesn't matter that you were Russian. Well, in this country, all you have to do is be here and be in business. It doesn't matter whether you're a social credit or not. Your political affiliation has nothing to do with it.
Right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
We're not through by any means, but if you have questions, don't just direct them to Glenn. It's Joe Thauberger. And then we're going to have a word later on from this gentleman.
Could I ask
Mr.
you,
Cox, and some more, eh?
could I
Yeah,
ask
ask
you,
who do you want
Mr.
to?
Chairman, if you would please identify the people who speak? I'd like to know the name of the gentleman.
Well, they should, when they do that, they should stand up and give their name. That was,
I'm
what's
Tony
your first
Palma,
name?
by the way.
Tony?
Palma. P-A-L-M-A.
And you know Young, Mr. Young, who doesn't look all that young, but he's young. And so have you got any curves to throw at Mr. Thauberger? Anybody?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer that when a question is asked either to me or to parties or anybody else, and then when that question is asked that I comment on that my side of that comment that was made.
I didn't get the last 50 seconds.
If somebody is making a statement,
Yeah.
now, the statement that was just made there, well, where do you get the money from for industry to produce? When any question is asked, the person that asks it, Mr. Boris gave his idea of the dividend. Now, I should maybe be able to give my idea of the dividend.
I agree with that. That's why I said it's up to you.
Yeah. So then as we go along, we debate these things as we go along.
Why don't you do that now, Mr.
Huh?
Do it now if you like.
Make a comment now.
Yeah, okay.
Through you.
First of all, I have nothing against the dividend. I have nothing against it, except one very important point and a few others, and not that important. But while we have, at the present time, every man, woman, and child in Canada is paying interest to the tune in taxes, children, the parents pay for it, $200 a month. Every man, woman, and child is paying interest just for the government debt. And that, to me, is a dividend. But it's all on borrowed money. See, this we're paying to the bankers for the borrowed money. Now, my argument against the dividend is this, the big one. While we have this debt, and it's going to take, to my estimation, from 10 to 15 years to clear it, so the governments are all free of debt. The greatest dividend that we can pay them is to pay this debt, and instead of giving them $200 a month for every man, woman, and child to the banking institutions and the financial institutions, we just reduce the amount of taxes they pay by $200, and that's the dividend. And that debt is killing Canada, and we have no way of saving Canada unless we have some method of paying that debt and the interest on it. Now, that's number one. That's number one. Now, secondly, the dividend, as I say, I preached it for years, and still not against it. But first of all, pay the debt. Now, secondly, Mr. Borham, didn't bring the book with me. Mr. Borham is the economic professor of the Ottawa University. And he wrote a book called Economic Thinking for Canada. And he came out and he made this statement here. I'll read you this because, oh boy, this taught me a lesson. He said, "The direct printing of new money has the virtue of neither increasing the national debt nor the annual interest charges on that debt. Its use is required responsible conduct and a great deal of knowledge by the part of the Department of Finance and Parliament. But these requirements should be there already." Now it goes on and makes two observations. Now listen to me. The final observations are worth addressing here. First, over the time, the national debt by the government issued money could easily be paid off, if so desired. All the elements of the process have been discussed above. Growth in the volume of goods and services being produced in a country generates the need for a growing money supply. This additional money could be used to pay off the national debt. Now here's an economist, and I have in my Billion for the Bankers, I have another 8 or 10 economists that are advocating monetary reform. And if you want a party, it's not going to be called funny money because you're going to get something for nothing, which people don't understand until they are students or economists. If you're going to go along with these economists, you're going to find out your funny money disappear. And if you adopt the other, now second, watch this. If you have, let's say, these economists on your side, you'll have the first foot in the door. If you go and adopt the old social credit idea, and I'm not speaking against it, not after the national debt is paid, but if you adopt that, you'll be on the same foot as you were before. They call it funny money because people didn't understand. Still today, when I talk to people, they just don't understand how you can get something for nothing. You have to be an economist. I remember Mr. Hansen giving a great talk one day on the dividend and the compensated price. And Walter Tucker, the liberal, said to me, he says, I was listening to Hansen's speech the other night. No, he says, a fellow would have to be an economist, he says, to understand. And the average voter will never be economist. So they don't understand. The fellow said to me, I was at a wedding the other day, and the fellow said, how in the world you tell me how you're going to get money for nothing unless you borrow? You just have to borrow it. There's no other way. So you see the poor fellow goes down to the Bank of Canada to issue money. Now, how are you going to get the message out to add to but let me tell you something. My daughter had to take study this book on economics. She's taken in the university. So look what he finishes off to say. And the second method is do not associate this with the acceptance of social credit economic theories. It is presented solely as an alternative to borrowing on budgetary deficits. An alternative. So I and my daughter got on with my help. We wrote a letter to Mr. Moore. And here's what we said. We thought that professors should be objective. Here you can give a better explanation of social credit monetary theory than I had ever heard of a social creditor. And you're an economist. But here you're biased enough to make this statement to not associate this writing with social credit. Within 10 days we had an answer. And I'll make you guess what he said. I have not the thing wrong with monetary reform of social credit. What I don't like is the compensated price, the dividend, and that stuff. No place in economics. For Mr. Borum, an economist. Now if you want to fight those guys again, fight them. I say, let's use them. Let's use them. Because what I'm interested in is to get the power back into the Bank of Canada and to pay off the national debt. And I hope that happens while I'm still alive, but I doubt it. I think the only time is going to be on telling on one of these days. But to me, that is the most important. And the way to get it, as I said before, is to have a democratic system. Now, what we're scared of, and all social credit, and I was too, I used to say, and if you think that I would trust those guys at all to use this money, you've got another discount. I used to say that. Because I don't trust them any more than you do. But that was a different day. If you get true democratic democracy like you got in Switzerland, it's going to be a different story altogether. You'll be able to trust your government. And until you're able to trust your government, we're on the wrong road. Thank you.
You had a chance. Let's give, don't make your question too long, really, and then Mr. Ford's next. Okay? Yes, question. Who is it directed to?
Oh, to Mr. George
And your
Thauberger.
name?
George Nagel. It's two parts. Is the Bank of Canada Canadian or a branch of the International Monetary Fund? If money supply is like water, it is limitless. As in Section 191 or 92 of the British North America Act, the government is supposed to issue coin and currency and controls the banks. In no wise is this provision to be changed. What do you say to that?
What about
That the money is issued by the government And banks are controlled by the government. What social credit
Is
is
not.
about.
It is not. What
And
you're
yet,
saying, it
we
is not.
don't have that. We've lost it in the, we've got a parasite bank in our, and it's called the Bank of Canada. And it's cleaning off the cream every time the cow is being milked. And this is wrong, and this is helping to put Canada into debt.
Right, I understand your question. Now, my answer to your question is that we had this right, it was given to us through the British North America Act to issue our own money. Now, we made another statement there. When you issue too much money, then it becomes worthless. Money becomes worthless. And so the GNP, we had no argument, I don't think it with any social creditors or with any other party. The GNP is the guide to how much money you can issue. So that's solid. You can't issue anymore. And when the government, when the Bank of Canada is issued enough money to balance production with consumption, you cannot issue anymore. Then the people have to go back and borrow, if you want to borrow, from the people. That's the place to borrow from. Because the interest then goes back to the people and the money is spent back to them again. So that's the answer, I think, to your question. Is that clear?
No, except that...
Well, just one other thing I missed, I think. You're talking about the Bank of Canada is controlled by international finance. You made that statement, and that's bad. I agree with you. That's why Switzerland doesn't belong to the I.M.F. nor to the Bank of Canada and these things. That's great, because as long as you're going to be controlled, as long as the Bank of Canada, the government is controlled by foreign countries.
I'd like to admit the possibility that we have other resources besides the GNP. For example, our people, along with my age, I forgot just what was on my mind. It has to do with gold and silver and things like that. There are other sources of wealth besides the GNP.
Okay, let's bring it up later. Mr. Ford or Henry Ford, if you would direct the question to this.
It isn't a question. I was just going to express some agreement with what's been said. Is that all right?
Sure.
Well, I agree with both Glenn and Joe that we need debt-free money to balance our economy. And I like both of their arguments. But I do think that in this time of emergency, with people homeless on the streets in every city in Canada, and children hungry in school, there never was a better time, Joe, for a direct dividend or consumer rebate or whatever you want to call it, right to the people. And people of today are familiar with government funding welfare and unemployment insurance and so on. The machinery is there, I think. And it would be a good time to really consider a dividend. Every merchant in Canada knows that there's a shortage of consumer purchasing power. 2/3 of our economy is driven by consumer spending. And although I like your idea, I don't think it's fast enough for the emergency we face. We have a desperate situation here in Canada. Not for old guys like me that are on pension, but for the young people coming up. They don't know where to turn. Not for a job, but for a place to sleep tonight. And I would like you to really rethink this idea, and maybe you could get yourself behind a dividend. Thank you.
Well, as I say, the dividend is needed out there today. But my argument, I gave it to you before. If you're paying $200 a month for the man, woman, and child to pay interest to the bankers, and in the meantime you pay out a dividend to help the people, every year we're going another $30 billion into the red, and every year the government has that 10% interest, the government has to pour another $3 billion to make that new, not the old, but that new debt that we're piling on. And as I say, I don't know whether
we have to take our turns. You had your hand up.
I did, yes.
Now you're next, and then, yeah, you haven't had a turn, and then the gentleman back there again. So you're next, Mr. Hill.
I'll direct this question to you, Joe. Peter Hope's the name. I'm from Calgary. The debt is fictitious. Why should we be obligated to pay it off?
That's what I see.
Now, I've heard people say, let's write it off. My tax dollars are gone. I have no claim on them whatsoever. The bankers, they go to them, and it's purely a matter of paper. Why can't we reclassify that as deferred taxation and tell them to pay it off?
And you were saying the bankers should
That's right.
how they're going to pay it.
How are you going to pay it off?
No, you just scratch.
Out of their dividend.
They've got billions on paper that we supposedly owe to them. Put a tax on it.
Yeah, well, of course.
Anyway, but there's no way that we should be obligated to pay on a fictitious debt.
Yeah.
You only have to listen or go to your BMA Act, where the federal government had the authority to issue paper money, debt-free. But there's one thing that a lot of people don't know, is that they could use an agency, which they have designated the banks, and gave them that power. And you know very well yourself that when the government wants money, Mulroney went in there, yeah, he was going to clean up this debt. So for 30-some days or 28 days during the prorogation of Parliament and the new one being government, the new one being sworn in, he said the cupboard was bare. Every time a till rings, money goes to the government. You can start in Newfoundland on an 8-hour day. By the time you get to the West Coast, it's a 13-and-a-half-hour day. So when he says the cupboard was bare, he's a liar. And the first thing he done, the first order of business, was to establish $19 billion of credit. And that was the issue of a treasury bill or a bond or whatever. The banks wrote a check for it. No money changed hands. But that's the system that they use to suck money out of production, out of existence. Now, I say the whole thing is a scam, and no way will I agree to paying that off.
Thanks, Peter. Gentlemen, we may have to bend the rules here just a little because we don't know what your questions are, but one of our speakers wants to answer directly to Mr. Hope, and then we'll get back to you, Mike.
I'll just be very brief. I want to backtrack to before that, emphasizing the emergency the country is finding itself in now. People are in need. They're almost on the streets. Joe, by taking the surplus funds that we find in our economy, setting the equilibrium of money and goods in a distributive system, those newly found money, if they go to pay the national debt, they're not going to pay those people in need. And those people in need are those people with very thorough basic human needs of food, clothing, and shelter. That money should not necessarily go to the reduction of the national debt. Primarily, that should go to people in need. If you are going to subsidize the debt charges, who are you going to be subsidizing? It's the top 2/3 of the people in the country. The bottom 2/3 will not be getting their share of their cultural heritage from this nation. They will not be getting their share of these renewed because a goodly percentage of the people in this country are not paying taxes. They are not contributing to the national debt other than through the GST and these other fringe things. I think it's the bottom people we have to speak of because we're getting it all ourselves.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm just going to comment, and then you're next, so get your breath. I'll just be a few seconds. I think due to the fact that we are so short of purchasing power. Now, some years ago, the General Hospital put out the bulletin from the labor union there, and this is old stuff, but it's as bad or worse today. And they said the economy was short $24 billion purchasing power. Now, if I was the government, and you're going to vote for me rather than these fellas, because I'm going to give you something for nothing. If we issued $25 to every man, woman, and child, everybody, we wouldn't have a surplus yet. And that's what's needed. And if we need it twice a year until we get enough purchasing power out there, we can do that. We won't be knee-deep in money, Joe. But anyway, I'll stop there. And the cameraman's next, and then Palmer's next. Cameraman, you had your hand up there.
Okay, yeah, Alan McLean's the name. This question is to anybody that can answer it. I just, irregardless of whether, the debt is illegal or whether it's real money that is owed or so on, so forth, I figure that the problem has been compounded by going into the international sphere and borrowing outside of Canada. Because even though you're borrowing inside of Canada, maybe it's a bad thing, but it's not as bad, because at least the money is theoretically circulating. So ever since we started borrowing outside of Canada, which I think Trudeau started, well, anyway, the question is, how do we get out of that international sphere? Which I think would be half the battle, maybe.
That's a good question. The internal debt for Canada is my son's argument. Dad, he says, you worry too much about that. We can just inflate ourselves out of it. We can do what this gentleman just said. There's nothing to it. We just cancel it out. Fine. So we maybe break a few banks. Because we do that, because some will go even without doing that. But anyway, there's one thing I said to him, my son, and then his eyes opened. You cannot inflate yourself out of foreign debt. And it's the foreign debt that's going to kill Canada, not the internal debt, because you can just cancel it out anytime you like. But the United States and Japan and Germany are not going to let you inflate yourself. I talked to a banker of the I.M.F. in Regina, speaker. So I said, here is Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and all these countries. They're broke. They're never going to be able to pay. How would you ever expect to get paid? And he said, we're not even worried about those little fellas. We're not worried about them. What we're worried about is Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. If you think we're going to let them off the hook, you've got another guest coming. And if you think they're going to let Canada off the hook, you've got another guest coming. And you remember one thing, to pay off that foreign debt is going to be tightening your belt. And I don't care whether you have social credit or what kind of assistance